Do you know of someone who ruined their life in just a matter of minutes? If so, how did they do it?
When I was in my early 20s, I worked as an energy worker in field service. One of my really close friends was someone who I was on calls with regularly. A project lead pressured both of us to work on equipment we weren't qualified or trained to work on, and we unfortunately relented. We were halfway done with the task and I walked out to the truck to grab water bottles. Halfway to the truck I hear a giant buzz, then a huge bang, then screaming. By the time I get back to the generator room, he's fully on fire. The cabinet had arc blasted and he had been right in the way. By the time I got our fire blanket from the truck, he was basically fully engulfed. I was able to put him out and get him into as much of a recovery position as I could, and then I called our shop to get them to organize rescue to our location. He somehow survived 80 to 90% second and third degree burns, but coded so many times he ended up with severe brain damage from oxygen deprivation. He lost his eyes, his sense of smell and taste, and much of his sense of touch. I think he lost his hearing too from the noise of it too. He's in a vegetative state in a full-time care facility now. I had frequent nightmares for years about it. The thing that stuck with me the most was since the arc blast had hit him basically right in the face, it basically boiled his skin off. I ran in and saw him ripping large pieces of his face off while he tried to bat the flames off. The smell and sight of that never goes away.
An ex-girlfriend of mine, lovely person, was out at a restaurant/bar with a friend one night. They had a meal and played pool. When they left, for some reason she drove his car. I don't know why, but I know that when she and I were together she asked to drive my car just for the experience of driving a different car. Maybe that was it. And I imagine, driving in someone else's car, you take a few extra seconds to adjust the seat and the mirrors and get your bearings. Unbeknownst to her, a teenager was driving a Mustang nearby. He was pissed because someone passed him a mile earlier, and his ego was hurt. He decided to catch up to the guy and floored the Mustang, getting up to speeds in excess of 100 miles per hour. As my ex pulled out of the parking lot to cross the median, she had no way of seeing the Mustang barreling toward her over a hill. He crashed into her, killing her and her passenger. 2 seconds earlier or later and they would not have made contact. I went to his trial. I remember her poor mother sitting there stone-faced while testimony was given. Several lives were ruined in that moment. My ex was only 26. She never got married, never had kids, never found her way in life.
College frat party. Very chill vibe, not a rager. Mildly drunk kid, mid-conversation, decides to hop up and have a seat on the railing of a deck we were out on. He hopped up and did one of those panicked flails that you do when your chair is about to tip backwards on you, falls backwards off the deck. Lands on his head. Medevac to the nearest trauma center. Did not make it through the night. I didn't know him, just seen him around campus. What was really sad to see was most people assumed he was being a drunk idiot at a raging frat party and wound up doing some dumb stunt. He really just made a minor drunken mistake/miscalculation and paid for it with his life.
When I was a teenager, my dad and this dude had beef with each other. My dad was dating this guy's ex-wife, and he didn't like that. They bumped into each other at a bar, and exchanged some words. My dad left the bar, and the dude was waiting for him outside. A car rolled up, and somebody handed the dude a handgun. He pointed at his head from about 2 feet away and pulled the trigger. Luckily for my father, the gun jammed. My pops wasn't taking any chances, so he took off running. The dude cleared the gun and emptied the clip, missing all but one shot that hit my dad in the back. My dad was already downtown and the hospital was only a couple blocks away, or so he thought. Unluckily for my padre, the hospital was under renovation and preparing for relocation. When he saw that it was under construction, he slumped over and called 911 for an ambulance. The surgeons removed his kidney because it was too damaged to repair, and survived. The dude got an attempted murder charge and almost 15 years in prison. Edit. Thanks for the kind thoughts. My dad is no longer with us, due to complications from COVID. But I'm sure he would have found it entertaining to hear that so many people liked his story. I can remember seeing his stitched-up stomach. The surgeons opened his belly up from the sternum down to his waist. It was super gnarly. To answer some questions. To my knowledge, they never found the accomplice who handed him the gun. I agree that he deserved more time. I think the max sentence for a first-degree attempted murder charge is 20 years. He may have gotten a shorter sentence because he was a first-time offender. I'm not exactly sure on that.
I had a friend who got into his car drunk with 5 other people, flipped the car and killed one of the passengers. He went from being this charming, good-looking, likable guy to a shut-in and was seen as a monster to a lot of people in the community. He ended up committing suicide about a year after the accident. He was seriously broken about what had happened.
Kid I went to high school with wasn't going to graduate and decided to protest by speeding and doing wheelies on the road in front of the school. On his 3rd round, he passes a pickup truck, hooks his leg on the bumper and is thrown from the bike right on his head, snapping his neck. School posthumously graduated him. Edited to help clear up questions. Happened in 1995 on the northern Illinois/southern Wisconsin border. I noticed his intelligence has been questioned. Let me share an additional anecdote. His nickname was Bob. When asked what it was backwards, he replied without guile or irony that it was OOB. Whether you agree with the school's action in graduating him or not, locally it was considered window dressing as the whole town knew of what happened within hours of his accident.
Guy I went to high school with was kicked out of his college ROTC and moved back home. After some time of living at home, his dad walked into his bedroom and went off about him being a lazy ass and needing to do something with his life. He decided he was going to take his gun and rob a bank. Supposedly the gun wasn't loaded. But he did successfully rob the bank and get away. Some time went by, he moved out of his parents' house and started living it up. He eventually told someone he trusted. That person turned him in. He was arrested and charged. He got a count for every person who was in the bank because he had a gun. You can decide if he ruined his life when he decided to rob the bank or when he decided to tell someone that he did it.
The man that killed my grandfather had never so much as had a speeding ticket. He was married with kids and fell behind on rent. My grandfather that was in his 80s worked for the company that rented this guy his home for extra money. Grandpa couldn't reach him about his rent, so went and did a welfare check. The guy panicked and murdered my grandfather. Destroyed more than one life in a matter of 30 seconds.
Pretty successful woman at a company I worked got drunk, took an Uber home from a party. Realized she left the keys to her apartment behind, so she decided to climb up to her 2nd-story balcony to get her spare set. She slipped, paralyzed herself, couldn't work for a year, racked up ridiculous medical debt, and the pandemic left her position useless, so she was let go.
My father punched a window out of anger. Severed the artery and ligament in his bicep. Almost bled out. Effectively removed his ability to work with his hands, which was the one thing he had going for him. He then became a moody POS alcoholic. Actually, he always was one, but way worse after this. He then beat the neighbor across the road with a pipe after they got drunk and got into an argument. He was arrested and went to jail. My parents lost the family home. They ended up splitting. I went no contact with him. 2 years later he took his life.
My former roommate. Had a great job, made great money, had his own house in which I rented a room. The only problem was he was a serious alcoholic and a shitty person. He'd get up at 4:30 to go to work, get off at 2, and then hit the bar until 11. Every single night. Unless he had a girl coming over, then he'd come home at 10, do a quick cleanup of his filthy room and have obnoxious and very inconsiderate loud sex. He hit a guy who was riding his bike drunk driving his way home one night. Fled the scene, came home, and went to the neighbor's house and said he hit a pole. The neighbor called the police, and on the way to the house, they found the guy he hit with his front bumper next to the body. He went to jail for vehicular homicide. Did 6 months and got out. Now he lives with his parents and can't get a job because his story is a little infamous in our town. His sister took over his mortgage and lives in his house now. All he does all day is cry on Facebook about how life isn't fair and bad-mouths the guy he killed.
Security company, this happened before I worked there, but some co-workers told me the story. Guy was doing well at his job. Got lots of promotions, on his way to lieutenant, but was too into his job and got a police scanner that he would listen to. One day just as he was getting off work, a high-speed chase went by. He hopped in his personal vehicle with his firearm, got to the front of the chase, blocked the suspect in and pulled his gun. Suddenly the cops were much more interested in the crazy guy with a gun. Got hit with several felony charges.
Some guy tried to come into my nightclub when he was clearly too drunk. I made the call to not let him in, so he starts shouting at me and tries to aggressively walk up to me. I put my hands up in defense and he's pushing back against me. Then the dude lunged at my boss next to me, so my boss shoves him. The guy tumbles backwards and slams the back of his head on a curb. Paralyzed from the neck down forever. Tried to take my boss to court for $15 million, but the camera showed this guy instigating everything.
The 17-year-old girl that was driving 105 miles per hour down a dark desert road at 6:35 a.m. Next week will have been 3 years since it happened. She hit me, head on. And that was it for her. I drive past her memorial on the side of the road every day. And I think about how someone with so much ahead of them could lose everything due to one bad decision. I lost my teeth that day. But she lost a whole lot more. I hope her family is doing well. This is probably a tough time for them.
Local police chief did a hit and run over the weekend on a parked, unattended vehicle, in his department vehicle. By the end of the day Tuesday he was resigning. State police investigated and issued a bunch of summary offense citations. DUI was not among the charges. No one was hurt and the guy resigned, but, you know, there's only one reason you drive away from hitting something after midnight.
A neighbor, his wife and his friend, and friend's wife, were at the neighbor's house. The two men both got into arguments with their wives and decided to go out drinking down the street. A few hours later I'm woken up by my sister banging on my bedroom door. I was staying with them at the time, because a car crashed doing probably 80 in a 25 miles per hour right next to our home. I jumped out of bed and got outside to see the neighbor's car crashed into a tree and two men trapped inside. The tree the car hit stopped them from ramming into another neighbor's house, and they hit it so hard, the battery was in the street after hours. Their car caught fire and we had to watch them burn to death, still see it and smell it every now and then when trying to sleep. I had never met the wife, so I had no idea who she was when she came up and asked me what happened, so I said some guy crashed his car. She took off running after she recognized the car. Can't believe I told her that her husband died so bluntly.
Childhood friend thought his wife was cheating on him with one of her co-workers. So he goes to the guy's house, waits for him to get off work, and jumps him with a metal bar thing. Left him laying with permanent brain damage, drove down to some old abandoned buildings by the docks and ended it. They had a kid and another on the way. She wasn't cheating on him. Dude had major insecurities.
This one I say with a heavy heart. Best friend was testing his bike about 200 meters from his house after a service and fixing a few parts. Wasn't speeding at all but had to swerve to avoid a mother and baby in the pram as they crossed onto the footpath/bridge he was on. Essentially it's a blind corner leading onto the bridge, so cannot see who's coming until they actual step foot. He slid off the bike to avoid the pair of them and hit his head on a pole, wasn't wearing a helmet or speeding, was simply testing the bike at probably 50 kilometers per hour. His skull fractured, basically brain ruptured, and I was stuck with him groaning in pain, eyes flickering uncontrollably with my shirt pushing into his brain, which felt somewhat like mashed potato. Waited for about 30 minutes before an ambulance arrived. Ambulance realized they couldn't help, so had to call in a helicopter. Was in a coma with severe head trauma for 2 weeks and died from pneumonia. Last words I ever said to him when he was completely conscious was, "Wear your helmet." He said, "I'll be back in a minute or two." R.I.P. Edit: I understand 50 kilometers per hour can be speeding, I should say. He wasn't hooning or riding extremely irrational as some people do on dirt bikes. He wouldn't have even left second gear. I was standing directly down the road, heard him brake as he approached the bridge, didn't even see the woman until he was off the bike.
There's a guy I went to school with. Super smart, full ride to a good college out of state. We were seniors at the time, so 2019-ish. We had a guy come in and give us a presentation on World War II stuff, including some guns that had the firing pins taken out. Dude took a picture of one as it was being passed around and posted it on Snapchat with the caption, "Don't come to school tomorrow." He got suspended, lost his scholarship, and we never really heard from him again. He's still alive as far as I know, but he's keeping his head down.
My childhood crush / next-door neighbor grew up to have an anger and alcohol problem. I googled him one day, as people do of folks they knew back when. I found he'd been sentenced to 98 years in state prison, no parole. He got liquored up, shoved his girlfriend around, and finished the night by getting into an armed standoff with cops from his apartment windows. He shot at them a bunch. Thank God he didn't kill anyone. I lost touch with him when we were 15. We were 33 when this happened. 45 now. He'll die in prison. I think about it a lot.
Nephew was driving a borrowed truck when he and a buddy picked up a friend, then the buddy shot the friend twice in the head and killed him. Then they dumped the body, returned the truck, with blood and bullet holes, and went home. Next day went back to clean up the truck and were both arrested for murder. My nephew pleaded guilty to a lesser charge and testified against the shooter. Did a few years in prison, got out, and is no longer welcome anywhere. He's not able to leave South Dakota due to the felony conviction, and nobody in our family has any interest in helping him out, so he's stuck there where everyone knows him as a murderer. Guy I knew had it all looking up, married his work colleague, had a kid together, bought a small house. But he just made the stupidest decisions when he got drunk. Has an argument with his wife, storms out and decides to drown his sorrows. Misses the last bus home and instead of walking or getting a taxi decides to try sleeping in a park known for homeless drug users. Ends up spilling his heart out and how he'll do anything to numb the pain. They offer him heroin, he takes it. 3 days later his family are panicking, they can see he's withdrawing money but can't find him. Eventually find him passed out in some alleyway, mom books him into rehab out of her own pocket. Lose his job, his wife, his kid, his house. All because he didn't want to face his wife after an argument. He's cobbled together a life now, but you can't help but think what could have been for better or worse.
My brother. He had 5 kids and a wife and some rage issues. About 25 years ago he was at his son's soccer game and one of the other dads struck up a conversation, about soccer, with my brother's wife. My brother effing lost his mind. He punched that guy, grabbed his wife by the hair and dragged her to his truck. Several witnesses testified about this later. Once they were home he entered the kitchen, shoved his wife up against the fridge, and strangled her to death. The kids testified to this. He then loaded the kids into his truck, grabbed his rifle, and headed toward the city where his plan was to kill me, our father, his kids, and then himself, to spare them all from the shame. Thankfully he had threatened this many times to many people, traffic was shit that day, and he was intercepted by police. He served 20+ years of his sentence. I testified twice as his parole hearings trying to prevent him from getting out because I knew what he was and always would be. He was eventually released but died 2 days later in a car accident.